life often throws us a curveball. I've got this story that I've kept under my hat up to now, 'cause it's a bit of a doozy. Have you ever felt like you're walking a tightrope between right and wrong, not 'cause you're trying to do something wrong, but 'cause of the way life's been going? That was how I felt that day. It was like the universe had a weird sense of humor and me as the star of the show. It all started on a pretty normal Saturday afternoon. Nothing too out of the ordinary, just some regular weekend stuff, cleaning, doing laundry, all that. While going through my closet to see what I could donate, I found an old miniskirt. I don't wear clothes like that anymore, but I thought I had outgrown that phase. But when I held the skirt, I remembered a lot. It was a reminder of my youth, when I was more confident and life was simpler. I was sorting through my closet to see what I could donate when I found an old miniskirt. I don't wear those anymore, but I thought I had outgrown that phase, but as I held it, I remembered a lot. It was a reminder of my youth, when confidence was natural and life was all about enjoying yourself and feeling free. I decided to try it on, just for fun, and I put it on. I wasn't expecting much, but when I looked in the mirror, I couldn't help but laugh. I was surprised at how it fit me better than I remembered. It made my body look a little bit more than I would have liked, but maybe that's just how it is. I was just trying to see if it would fit, and I heard a tap at the door. I thought to myself, who could it be? My hair was a mess, and I wasn't dressed to impress. I wasn't expecting anyone when I opened the door, and there was my nephew, Jason. He's all grown up now. At 22, he was strong and confident. He could walk into a room and get people's attention. He had a bag of tools and a casual smile. "Auntie, you called about the leaky faucet." I remembered that I had completely. He was in great shape at 22, with broad shoulders and a confident air. He was the kind of guy who could walk into a room and grab your attention. He had a tool bag and a casual smile. I remembered that I'd totally forgotten to ask him to come by and fix the sink in the guest bathroom. I felt a bit embarrassed about my outfit, but I chose not to dwell on it and just laughed it off. "Hey, please go into the bathroom. It's down the hall." He walked past me and I saw him pause for a second, his gaze flickering towards me before he quickly looked away. Maybe it was just me, but there was something weird in the air. Jason started working on the sink while I went back to my closet, but I felt a strange tension in the air. I'm not sure if you've ever felt that, but it's not a bad feeling or anything. Somebody's gaze is on me, but they're trying to be subtle about it. At first, I thought it was just me overthinking things, since he's my nephew. But then, as I was passing the bathroom to get something from the kitchen, Jason suddenly said, "Hey, Auntie May. Can you come here for a second?" I think I was confused, but I figured it was just me overthinking then. As I was passing the bathroom to get something from the kitchen, Jason suddenly said, "Hey, Auntie May. You can help me with the recorder, I think." When I went into the bathroom, I was even more confused. Jason was crouched with his sleeves rolled up, showing off his strong, tanned arms. He had a wrench in one hand and was pointing at the faucet with the other. "I think the pipe is stuck," he said, looking around. Record, he needed help. The next thing I knew, I was in the bathroom, and Jason was crouched down with his sleeves rolled up, showing off his strong, tan arms. He had a wrench in one hand and was pointing at the faucet with the other. "I think the pipe is stuck," he said, looking over at me. "Can you hold this while I try to loosen it?" I nodded and leaned in to grab the faucet. The bathroom was pretty small, and before I knew it, we were almost shoulder to shoulder. I tried to ignore how close we were, but I could feel the warmth of his arm touching mine as he worked. I glanced over. I looked at him, and noticed that Jason wasn't just focused on the pipe. His gaze kept shifting toward me, like he was trying to figure something out. It was subtle, and only I could see it, but I did. "Everything was fine." I asked, "Is everything okay?" He looked away. I asked, "Is everything okay?" He looked at me, and after a little hesitation, he smiled his usual relaxed smile. I laughed, trying to relax, and he looked at me like he knew what he was doing. "You're the expert," I said. "There's no pressure, but I noticed that you were looking at me for a bit too long." At me, and for a moment, he looked a bit uncomfortable before smiling his usual relaxed smile. This made me laugh, and he laughed too, and I felt a little better. "You're the expert," he said. There was no pressure, but I could tell that he was still looking at me. After a few minutes, he finally put down the pipe and stood up, wiping his hands on his pants. "It should be as good as new," he said. "Thank you," I said, trying to sound casual. "You're a lifesaver," he said, leaning against the counter and looking at me with a strange expression. He let go of the pipe and rose, dusting his hands on his pants. "It should be as good as new," he said. "Thank you," I replied, trying to sound casual. "You're a lifesaver," he said, leaning against the counter and looking at me with a mysterious expression. "You know, Auntie, I don't think I've ever seen you in attire like that before." I stopped for a second, and he continued, "I mean, this is something I just found in the back of my closet." I looked at him, speechless. He kept staring at me, and I could tell he was trying to figure something out. Then he smiled, but it looked different, like he got it. "It suits you," he said, softer than usual. I didn't know what to say, and I stammered, "Thanks. I guess it's just me." Jason didn't say anything for a minute. Then he smiled, but it looked different, like he understood. "Thanks," I said, trying to speak normally. I quickly went to the bathroom to get some space. But Jason followed me. When I stopped in the hallway, he stopped too. I turned to look at him. My heart was beating really fast. "Yeah," he paused like he was trying to think of what to say. "You ever feel like something's happened for a reason?" "What do you mean?" I asked, confused. He opened his mouth to say something, then shook his head and laughed. "Never mind, forget I said anything," I said, but I couldn't forget the way he looked at me. The tone of his voice stayed. I was there for a long time after he left that day. That night, I was on the couch, flipping through channels to try to shake off the awkwardness from earlier. I kept telling myself it was nothing, that I was overthinking the whole thing, was just that Jason was family. But just as I started to feel normal again, my phone buzzed on the coffee table. I leaned over, picked it up, and there was a message from Jason. "Hey, Auntie, can I ask you something?" I stared at the screen, debating whether to reply with something about the timing that felt strange. Why is he messaging? After a while, I replied, "What's on your mind?" His response came right away. "I keep thinking about today and you." It seemed obvious to me. I guess my stomach fluttered a little. What was he trying to say? My fingers stopped on the keyboard as I thought about my response. In the end, I chose a neutral reply. "I was just trying on some old clothes." He received my message right away. I saw the little typing indicator appear, but it took him a moment to respond. When his message finally came, it surprised me. "You seemed really good to me. I'm being genuine here." I looked at the screen, totally shocked. My pulse was going crazy. Was this a friendly comment, or was there something else there? I had no idea how to feel or what to say. After what felt like forever, I texted back, "Thanks, Jason. Your compliment is appreciated." I wished it would conclude the matter, but I saw it wouldn't. He said once again, "I'm not sure how to feel, but I experienced a sensation today." My breath felt constricted in my throat. I was venturing into perilous territory. I was feeling uneasy, and I wasn't sure how to handle it. Jason wasn't just an acquaintance, he was my nephew. Whatever he was feeling was off, but instead of dismissing him, I found myself hesitating. Maybe it was out of curiosity or to avoid confrontation. I wasn't sure how to handle it, and Jason wasn't just an acquaintance, he was my nephew. I thought about how he might be feeling, and I didn't want to upset him, so I didn't say anything right away. Then, the typing bubble popped up again. I took back what I said before to avoid any awkwardness. I started to feel better, but I also felt a bit uneasy. I told myself it was probably just a misunderstanding and that he would move on. I didn't respond right away because he was causing me stress. I took back what I said because I felt awkward. I was breathing heavily, feeling both relieved and uncomfortable. I told myself it was all a misunderstanding and that things would go back to normal. I put my phone down and felt like this was just the start of something that was going to happen the next day. I was still in a mess when I made a cup of coffee. I heard a knock at the door, and my heart started racing. I didn't think anyone was coming over. When I opened the door, I saw Jason standing there with his hands in his pockets. He looked as relaxed as always, but he also looked different. His usual carefree smile was gone, and he had a serious face that I didn't recognize. I said hi. Jason tried to hide my surprise. "What are you doing here so early?" he said, entering without waiting for an invitation. I was nearby and thought I would stop by. It was a weak excuse, and Jason didn't live anywhere near me, but I didn't say anything. Instead, I closed the door and followed him into the living room. He sat on the couch, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. The air felt heavy with unspoken tension. "Is everything all right?" I asked, taking a seat. He looked up at me, his eyes searching mine. "Last night, I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable." I breathed out a little easier, glad he was talking about it. "It's okay, Jason. Let's just forget about it." But he shook his head and said he couldn't just forget. I meant what I said. I got stuck not knowing how to answer. This isn't how family members should talk to each other. Jason and I started with caution, saying, "I think you're wrong. Your feelings are just in your head. It's real." He interrupted, his voice firm but not. "I'll admit it, Jason. I've been fighting this. I tried to shake it off, but I can't stop thinking about it. My pulse is racing, and I'm feeling all sorts of emotions, stunned, confused, and even a little ashamed." "How did we get to this point, Jason?" I asked, my voice cracking. "You've got to stop this, Jason." "I'll admit it, Jason. I'm a bit of a confrontational person. I've been trying to fight it, but I can't." My pulse was racing, and I had all sorts of feelings, astonishment, confusion, and even a little shame. "Jason, we can't keep doing this. My nephew is here, and this isn't appropriate." He nodded slowly, looking down. "I understand. It's wrong, but I had to speak up. I couldn't hold everything in any longer." The room was silent, except for the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know how to fix this, or if we could fix it. In the end, I stood up. I needed to get some space. "Jason, you should go. We both need time." He looked at me, with a mix of regret and desire in his eyes. He whispered, "Think about it. This isn't the last time we'll talk about this." Then he left without saying more. When the door closed, I felt relieved, but also uneasy. As the sun set, long shadows were cast on the living room. I saw the edge of an envelope sticking out from under the front door. My chest tightened when I got closer, knowing what was inside. I opened the paper with shaky hands and a racing heart. The handwriting was obviously Jason's, neat and methodical, as if each word had been carefully chosen. The message said, "Auntie, I know you asked for me to leave, and I respect that. But I can't help but feel that there's more to this than meets the eye. I'm not asking for anything. I just need you to understand that if you want me to leave, I'll do it without hesitation. But if there's even a little bit of mutual feeling, please let me know. I'm waiting for your reply. I was up all night, thinking about your message. I wasn't sure if I should feel angry, flattered, or scared. I had a lot of thoughts running through my head. Was he serious? Could he really feel that way? I felt this way, but I didn't want to dismiss it completely. I folded the paper and put it in a drawer. I told myself not to react and that ignoring him was the best thing to do. But deep down, I knew there was more to it. Later that night, as I tried to sleep, but my phone vibrated again. It was Jason. "I said I wouldn't bother you, but I want to know if you got my message." I looked at the message and thought about answering. I finally wrote back and said, "Yes, I got it. But Jason, this has to stop." He answered right away. "It's hurting both of us." "I'll stop if you want me to. Just be honest. Do you still have feelings for me?" My fingers were on the keyboard, and I admitted, I tried to sleep, but my phone vibrated again. It was Jason. "I said I wouldn't bother you, but I wanted to know if you got my message." I looked at the message and thought about answering. I finally replied, "Yes, I got it. But Jason, this has to stop." His answer was quick. "It's hurting both of us. I'll stop if you want me to. Just tell me honestly, do you still like me, even a little bit?" My fingers were on the keyboard, and I was saying. Anything would make things worse, and saying I'm not interested felt wrong. So I answered, "Jay, you're my nephew. That's all I can say." It wasn't the answer he wanted, but it was the only one I could give. The next morning, I got to work and was ready to forget about the stuff that had happened. My job was my safe place, a place where I could focus on work and not think about personal stuff. But as I sat at my desk and read emails, I felt weird. It was like someone was watching me. I looked up at him and stopped. Jason was standing just outside the office window, his hands buried deep in his pockets. He looked both conflicted and resolute. What was he doing? I said under my breath, feeling my chest constrict. I quickly excused myself and stepped outside before he could come in and make things worse. Jason, what are you doing here? I asked, trying to stay calm. I needed to see you, he said quietly but firmly. You didn't answer my question last night, Jason, I said. I've already said this situation is unhealthy, and you didn't deny it. He said, hey, we can't keep talking about this. You didn't deny it when I got closer to you. You didn't mention me. I didn't feel anything when I stepped back and held the strap of my bag. Jason, this isn't about feelings. It's about right and wrong. Whatever you think is going on here isn't right. He died, scratching his head. I know that's messed up. I've told myself a million times, but I can't control how I feel. His words stayed with me, heavy and unsettling. I didn't know what to say, so I started to leave. Auntie, wait. He called out, grabbed my arm, and made me stop as I looked down at his hand. There was a raw vulnerability in his face that made it hard to just leave. I'm not trying to ruin your life or make things more complicated, he said. I just want to understand. If there's no possibility, I'll take back what I said. You won't have to see me again. Those words hit me like a physical blow. The idea of him cutting all ties was tough, but I knew that if we kept this up, it would only hurt Jason and me more. I said, I'm starting to feel this way about your family. He nodded, and his shoulders dropped as he backed off. Okay, I get it. I'll back off and watch, he said. As he walked away, I felt a weird mix of relief and sadness. I thought this was it. And that we could finally move forward. But later that evening, I got a call that threw everything into chaos. Jason had been in an accident. When I got to the hospital, what he told me changed everything. The call came late in the evening, right as I was about to head home. My phone was vibrating on the coffee table, and when I looked, I saw Jason's name on the screen. My stomach dropped, but it wasn't Jason on the line. It was a woman from Mercy General, saying, your nephew there's been an accident, and they want you to come down to the hospital. I was super nervous, but I grabbed my keys and rushed out the door. When I got to the hospital, my heart was beating super fast. I went into the ER through the swinging doors and looked around until I saw him. Jason was lying on a bed, with a cut on his forehead and his arm in a sling. He looked up at me when I got to his bed. His face was pale, but his eyes still had that same intensity one remembered. I asked him what happened, and my voice sounded worried. He said something, but it was really faint. Hey, Jason, I'm a bit annoyed. You really gave me a scare. He chuckled gently, then grimaced, clutching his side. Sorry about that. I wasn't sure who else to hit up. I let out a breath and leaned over, putting a chair next to his bed. I'm here now. You all right? He nodded, his demeanor softening. Yeah, I'm good. But there's something I gotta tell you. His voice was calm, even though his eyes showed he was nervous. I didn't contact you because of the accident. I reached out because I realized I was confused and didn't know what was going on. While we were talking, he looked at his hands and fidgeted with the edge of the hospital blanket. I thought about the possibility of not surviving, and my thoughts were consumed by my deep affection and the realization of my numerous mistakes, along with my desire to avoid losing you, Jason. I started to express this, but he raised a hand to interrupt me. I reached out because I realized something. I was confused and didn't know what was going on. While we were talking, he looked at his hands, his fingers fidgeting with the edge of the hospital blanket. I thought about how I didn't want to die, and about how I'd made a lot of mistakes and wanted to stop messing up. I started to say this, but he put up his hand to stop me. He said that he knew I'd crossed a line, and he loved himself for it, but he didn't just have a crush on me. He said he loved me more than anyone else, and he knew it was wrong, but he couldn't help himself. His words hung in the air, heavy and unrefined. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to tell him it would be okay, but another part knew I couldn't fix this with words. Before I could even think straight, a nurse came in and said visiting hours were over. She had a nice smile, but it was kind of pushy. I stood up, feeling both relieved and overwhelmed, and said, "Jason, we'll talk about this later." He nodded and I left. As I drove home, I kept thinking about what he'd said. I thought I'd made the right call by leaving, but when I got back, there was something weird about the house that made me think twice. Think about everything when I got to the house, it was really quiet. I walked up to the driveway, took off my shoes, and saw a small package on the kitchen table with my name on it in Jason's handwriting. I was a little nervous about opening it, and my hands were shaking a bit. Inside, I found a letter and a little photo album. The letter started with, "Auntie, I know you asked me to stop talking to you, but I have to." I was nervous as I got to the house. It was really quiet, and I felt like something was off. I took off my shoes and saw a small package on the kitchen table with my name on it. It was in Jason's handwriting. I wasn't sure what to do, so I opened it up. Inside, I found a letter and a little photo album. The letter started off with, "Auntie, I know you asked me to stop talking, but I need to explain everything." Then it said, "Even if this is the last time we talk. I told you to read the letter and look at the album. If you don't want me in your life anymore, I'll do what you want." I totally read the letter as soon as I got back. I started looking at the album. At first, I didn't know what was going on. I thought it was just love or respect, but then I started feeling like there was more to it. I'll explain everything, even if this is our last conversation. Please read this and look at the album later if you want me to leave your life. I read the letter, and my eyes scanned the text from the moment I got back. I felt a change in our relationship right away, but I couldn't figure out what it was. At first, I thought it was just love or respect, but it slowly became clear that it was more than that. I understand how this might be seen, and I've tried to stop it, but I can't. Change my feelings. You've always supported me more than anyone else. You've seen my worst moments and still care, which I don't take for granted. I hesitated, my pulse racing, the weight of his words almost overwhelming, but I kept reading. I put together this album to remind myself. I'm going to share this with you because I don't want to keep secrets anymore. I'll respect whatever decision you make, but I couldn't let this go unsaid. I set the letter down and opened the album. The photos were familiar, family barbecues, holiday dinners, and random snapshots I didn't even remember being taken. Each one was accompanied by a small note in Jason's handwriting pointing. I put together this album to remind myself of everything I love about you, not in a way that crosses any lines, but as a way to process my feelings. You'll find photos of us from family gatherings, moments where you were laughing or just being yourself. I've been hesitating, my pulse racing, the gravity of his words was nearly overwhelming, yet I continued reading. He said he liked the details, how happy I looked, how nice I was to others, and how strong I was. Tears welled up in my eyes. It was touching, but also kind of weird. I closed the album and sat there for a while, trying to process everything. Jason wasn't just being flirty, he was showing his true feelings in a way that was hard to ignore, but what could I do? I didn't want to discourage him, because it wouldn't have been right, and it would have messed up our family. But completely excluding him seemed as it was pretty rough, considering the obvious distress he was going through. Before I knew what to do, my phone buzzed again. Jason sent a message asking if I'd gotten the package he requested. He said that if I wanted him to leave, I should just tell him, and he'd be out by tomorrow. I thought about Jason's message for what felt like forever. My feelings were all over the place, and I couldn't make sense of it. He'd put the decision in my hands, and it could totally change our lives. I told our family that Jason should come over the next day to talk. He showed up right on time, and he looked both nervous and hopeful. I gave him a warm welcome, and we sat down together in the living room. The air was thick with unspoken feelings. I started by saying, "Jason, I've read your letter and looked at the album. I can see how much thought and effort you put into it, and it really moved me. But we need to set some boundaries for both of us." He nodded when I spoke, but he still looked cautious. "I get that you just need to know how I feel." I leaned forward and said, "I love you, like family. That's all I know. Your feelings for me are based on appreciation and thankfulness, which is cool, but we shouldn't mix those up." He nodded, but his face was still guarded. I know, I just need you to know that. That's all I know about my feelings. I leaned in and said, I love you, like family. That's all I feel. You feel this way because you appreciate and thank me, and that's okay. But we can't mix those feelings up. It would be bad for both of us in the long run. He looked at his hands, and his face had a mix of relief and sadness. He said, I don't want to lose you, Auntie. I'll try to deal with this. I reached out and took his hand, and I put a little pressure on it. You won't lose me, Jason, but you need to take some time to figure out what's going on. I get it, and I'm not trying to lose you, Auntie. I'll deal with this. I took his hand and gave it a little squeeze. You won't lose me, Jason. But you gotta take some time to figure out what's really going on in your heart. Maybe talk to someone. Someone who can help you deal with these feelings. He nodded again, and for the first time in days, I saw a glimmer of peace in his eyes. We sat there for a bit longer, talking about lighter stuff, his plans for the future, and how he wanted to focus on his career and hobbies. By the time he left, I felt like a weight had been lifted, even if things weren't. We were back to normal, at least for now. Jason took his time, and he gave us both some space. He was working on himself and getting help to deal with his emotions. Over time, our relationship went back to something closer to what it used to be. Was still supportive and clear, and it wasn't full of confusion. It wasn't easy, but we both learned from it. I learned the importance of setting boundaries and dealing with issues head-on. Eventually, things went back to normal. Jason took care of himself and got some help to deal with his feelings over time. Our relationship got back to being more like it was before, with support, family, and no confusion. It wasn't easy, but we both learned from it. I learned the importance of setting boundaries and dealing with issues head-on, while Jason found clarity and a sense of self that didn't rely on anyone else. In the end, I'm glad we were able to deal with such a tough situation without losing the bond that was most important to us as a family.